All right, hello. This is Sunday afternoon as I record this. I hope everybody is staying warm and safe and having a nice snow day. Um, as I teach, you can go ahead and pause the video whenever you need to write something down or answer a question. That's totally fine. The video itself is going to be kind of short. There's going to be some other things. I usually show a video or two during this lesson, so I will put those videos separately on Google Classroom with a couple questions for you to do. And so there will also be another assignment on there. So your bell ringer for today: is it important for the government to protect civil rights? Why or why not? You can take a moment to pause the video and answer that question. So I used to ask the question, why is it important for the government to protect civil rights? And then I changed my question to just basically allow you to tell me whether you think it is important. Some people think it's not important anymore. Maybe it used to be, but it's not important anymore because social pressures might prevent people from discriminating against people and against people's civil rights. Other people think that it is still important for the government to protect those rights. And so in the lesson today and tomorrow, we're going to get into kind of what that looks like in more of a modern context. I will say, different from class you've maybe taken over the last 2 years where civil rights were discussed. This is not really a history class, and so it's hard to talk about civil rights without talking about the history of the civil rights movement. But it's not just that, okay? In this class in government, we need to look at the legal kind of framework for civil rights and where those are found from a legal standpoint and how those differ from civil liberties. So clarity first, we need to talk about what civil rights are. Civil rights are rights that need to be protected by the government. All right, so there's also civil liberties we'll talk about in a few weeks here. Civil liberties are rights that need to be protected from the government. So that would be, for example, you have rights to freedom of speech and religion, right to keep and bear arms. Those are rights that the government cannot take away from you. Civil rights, on the other hand, it looks at rights that you would have that other people would want to take away from you. And so what do we need is we need the government to come in and prevent people from taking away those rights. Some of the history of this is state and local governments, especially in the American South, who took people's civil rights using Jim Crow laws that required and mandated segregation in all kinds of public facilities and accommodations, and even in schools. And the national government came in and basically passed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and protected people from the smaller and local governments. So that's what civil rights are. Okay, so civil rights, they stop the majority from hurting the minority and protect people from being barred their civil liberties unjustly. So when we say the majority and the minority, usually what comes to mind is like a racial majority and minority. It's not necessarily the case, although that may be part of it. Anything that makes somebody a minority, it could be a racial minority or nationality or a sexual minority or a religious minority or even a political minority. In this country, we believe that people have those rights and they shouldn't be taken away just because the more powerful groups want them to be taken away. It protects against discrimination. Okay, I'm going to minimize this so that you can see the whole PowerPoint here. Unlike how civil liberties prohibit certain legislation, civil rights are implemented through positive legislation. So when we say positive legislation, that doesn't mean good legislation, although it may be. What we mean here is this is legislation that does something, right? So it enacts something. It says that something must be done as opposed to prohibiting something from being done. All right, so this would be the government passing a law that requires local governments, for example, and state governments to follow through with protecting people's rights. So we have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, and these amendments are the legal basis for the civil rights movement. The 13th Amendment is what outlawed slavery in this country. and basically neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, right? So basically that just means that slavery shall no longer exist in the United States. The 14th Amendment is really the core basis for the civil rights movement. It does a lot of things. The first is the citizenship clause that says all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. Okay, so that really what that had meant was people who had been born in the United States as a slave had not been granted their citizenship, and the 14th Amendment changed that. It said that if you were born as a slave, if you were born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States. Now, today, nobody is born in the United States as a legalized slave, right? The 13th Amendment was passed in 1865, and the 14th Amendment in 1868. So nobody born today is a slave, but the text of the words is usually today thought of as to refer to as migrants. Okay, so if you were born in the United States, that's called birthright citizenship. It's a concept that means that you have citizenship in the United States based on the 14th Amendment. That is a pretty unique thing in the world. That is not the way it is in most countries. Most countries, your parents have to have citizenship for you to be born with citizenship. It also says no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of the citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay, so what that means is that all those Bill of Rights things, right? Your right to freedom of speech and religion, and your rights to due process and rights to keep and bear arms, all of those initially only applied to the national government, right? The first words of the First Amendment say Congress shall make no law, and that's really what it was referring to, is the national government. But in 1868, with the passage of the 14th Amendment, that expands those protections and those rights to the states as well. And that's a really good thing, because the states are most likely the ones who are going to be prosecuting anybody for any kind of crime, and so it's important that due process be extended to the states. And then this last section right here, this is the basis for the civil rights movement. It says, nor deny any person within his jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. That means that the laws have to apply to everybody evenly. That means that southern states cannot pass these Jim Crow laws that prohibit or that require discrimination. Now, does that mean that it happened? No, because a lot of the story of the civil rights movement, legally speaking, is to fight for the rights that should have been guaranteed with this 14th Amendment and also the 15th Amendment. The right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, I believe is what that says. My thing here is blocking it. But basically it means that the states cannot say that only people of a certain race can vote. That is not something that the states are allowed to do, even though states do have the right to make their own voting laws. So these amendments passed between 1865 and 1870 would become the legal basis of the civil rights movement. And so you'll have an assignment this week where you're going to look at we have some 14th Amendment questions, and you're going to look and see how did the civil rights movement apply to those questions. So the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s fought against discrimination against black people. Okay, they fought against segregation. They fought in favor of voting access and interracial marriage. Now, these are rights that should have been guaranteed within the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. But just because it says something on a piece of paper, that still has to be enforced. That has to be enforced by an executive branch who enforces the law and a judicial branch who interprets the law. And it really took a long time to be able to do that. This led to government action such as Brown versus Board of Education, which said that separated schools violated the 14th Amendment, right? The 14th Amendment, back on this slide, which requires equal protection of the laws. People argued correctly that segregated schools did not provide equal protection of the law. And there was a Supreme Court case that came out earlier that was called Plessy versus Ferguson. Hopefully you remember learning about that last year, where in Plessy versus Ferguson, the argument was made, well, they don't really need to be integrated. They just need to be they just have to be equal. And so initially it was like, well, we'll keep them separate but equal. That was the famous Plessy versus Ferguson doctrine. Brown versus Board came in, and basically that decision was, hey, simply by separating them, you are telling people that they are unequal. The Civil Rights Acts of 1957 and 1964, which barred discrimination in public facilities. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, which basically was the federal government stepping in and trying to enforce all the workarounds of the 15th Amendment down here, which was, for example, they would do literacy tests and poll taxes and things like that, that would prevent people from voting. And then the Fair Housing Act of 1968 that basically said you can't take race into consideration when deciding who to rent your house to. Let's see. Okay, so that is it for today. In terms of the history of this, I'm going to give you a couple videos to watch, and then you can answer the questions that are on there. Tomorrow we will move on to this.